Hello, this is Michael Thompson, Deputy Mayor and Chair of the City of Toronto's Economic and Community Development Committee. It is my pleasure to now introduce the next session, a fireside chat on the future of entertainment. This is a subject near and dear to me. While concert and live events are in limbo right now due to COVID-19, Toronto will come roaring back when we defeat this disease. But live events are only a portion of entertainment. Toronto is North America's third largest cluster, where content creation, production, post-production, gaming, and the animation industry collide. Toronto is a hotbed of immersive content creation and innovation, fueled by cutting-edge R&D from institutions such as the Screen Industry Research and Training Center, by industry events such as virtual conference. We also have some of the most attractive media tax credit in the world, whether you are a Canadian or foreign-owned controlled company. So I'm going to be intrigued by the comments from Strauss Zelnick, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Take-Two Interactive, one of the largest gaming software companies in the world. One of its labels, Rockstar, already has a footprint in the Toronto region. To get the session underway, it is my pleasure to now introduce Ian Scher, Editor-at-Large, CNET, who will provide more formal introduction of the discussion, and Mr. Zelnick.
Hi, everyone. I'm here with Strauss Zelnick, the CEO of Take-Two Interactive, and we're going to be talking about the video game industry today. It's been a very weird couple of weeks for all of us, and really a couple of months. It's been, we've all been stuck at home, and we've all been begging for entertainment. So maybe you can give us a sense of what your experience has been and everything. We've heard video games are really popular during this time. What have you been seeing?
Well, let's start by just acknowledging that what we're about to discuss today is a set of high-class problems. And these are really terrible times for a lot of people. And of course, a lot of people have experienced tragedy during these times. So it's bittersweet to talk about how well our industry is doing or how well our company is doing when so many people are suffering economic privation and personal loss. And so I like to put it in context. The fact of the matter is, though, that with people at home starting last March, across the board in the entertainment industry, we did see a benefit. We did see an uptick. And but I think what's interesting, you said it's been an interesting couple of weeks. I agree with you, is that as the months passed, it became clear that that uptick perhaps wasn't just related to the pandemic. Certainly as people returned to work outside of home, as many people have, as other activities returned, as the warm weather returned, it became clear that you couldn't attribute the increase in entertainment consumption only to sheltering at home. And I think what we're seeing now, and I said this last spring, I said, I suspect that we're going to see, and Activate, the consultancy's research supports the view, a continued increase in interactive entertainment growth, disproportionate growth, and consumption that will outlast the eventual end of the pandemic.
I wanted to touch on that a little bit because I think you've got a really interesting thread to talk here about. As you mentioned, this has been a really tough time for everybody. And what I found really interesting is that, we've all kind of known that a lot of the online video games are social creatures as well, right? They tend to bring people together. They have experiences together. But I think it's really kind of made it a lot more clear to a lot of us that games like Fortnite, or in the case of you with Grand Theft Auto Online, that these games are becoming places where people can kind of congregate and actually interact with one another without having to worry about getting sick. And that's a really key thing, it seems.
Well, I think that's right. I think that people understood that interactive entertainment offered great graphics, great stories, great characters, and a fun experience. I'm not sure if people fully understood that we have all of those things, which other forms of entertainment have, and we have the ability to connect with friends and communities while experiencing the entertainment. And those people don't have to be sitting in the same room with you. We're social creatures. These times certainly point that out. We like to consume entertainment with other people. Video games allow you to do that no matter where you are. And I think you're 100% right. Our online games and those of our competitors have gotten a real boost from the fact that it's not just a great fun experience, but you can talk to people and connect with people and have friendships while you're doing it. I mean, my mom is a bridge player, and some of the people she plays bridge with, she's never met in person and never will meet in person. She considers them friends.
Yeah, the bridge community I know is very hardcore online. One of the other things that's been interesting is that the entertainment world broadly has gone through a lot of ups and downs through this whole thing. And you have history at Fox, you've got history with Sony and CBS. So I was hoping maybe we could put that hat on a little bit and talk about just kind of how you've seen other forms of entertainment fare through all of this. Because I think there was a lot of assumption that stuff like Netflix and streaming and Disney Plus and all this stuff would just boom. And in some cases they have, but there's also been a rocky road for some of them too.
I mean, largely it's a story of good news for everyone. I mean, largely linear entertainment and interactive entertainment both have gone up during this time. Interactive entertainment has gone up at a greater rate, and Take-Two has performed at a rate higher than the industry's rate, which is a reflection of the games that we have at the moment. Hopefully always, but certainly at the moment.
Yeah.
So initially, there was added consumption across the board, but of course, in time, consumption will go to where the quality is, and so you'll have some perform better than others. When this all recedes and goes back to normal, I think you'll see the growth rates or lack thereof of each industry kind of return to normal, with the exception of interactive entertainment, where I think you will see meaningful growth, some of which will come at the expense of competitive formats.
Yeah, and to your point, I think there's a lot of kind of the other part of video games that's always fascinated me is how much of a relationship there's been with the movie industry. And I'm not just talking about licensed games, but actually creating movie-like experiences. And whenever I see, again, going to your games, the advertising for Red Dead Redemption, which is a Western epic for those who don't know, or looking at Grand Theft Auto, they all have kind of a very cinematic feel to them. And I was curious just kind of how you see that pushing forward even more. It seems like that cinematic feel is becoming ever more important, and at some point is going to run up against the other forms of entertainment that we're all watching too.
The cinematic feel is of paramount importance, and with new technology, and of course there are new platforms, we're getting closer and closer to true live action in video games. So, our basketball game, just move back from the screen a little bit, it looks real. You can't tell the difference. And within 5-7 years, if we want to make a game that's photorealistic, we'll be able to. So we're going to be able to offer all of the fidelity that a motion picture can offer with the ability to interact. That doesn't mean it supplants linear storytelling. It's a different animal, and it will stay a different animal. But if you have an interest in interactive entertainment, the experience is going to get better and richer and more exciting.
Yeah, and it's often 60 hours instead of 2, so there's a lot more going on there as well.
That's right. You can engage for a long period of time and because you have this story that, first of all, can be nearly endless. In the case of Grand Theft Auto Online, so far it is endless.
Right.
And even with a story that has bookends, a single player game that has a beginning and ultimately an end, there are numerous paths to get through the game, as you know. So you can, depending on the title, if it's high enough quality, you could play it a number of times, and each time would be different.
Yeah, and if we just to remind people how endless Grand Theft Auto Online is, it came out in 2013, if I remember correctly. So that's 7 years that it's been going on, and it's still one of your top performers every quarter.
Well, I mean, we've said that Grand Theft Auto Online is expected to set another record this fiscal year, so it's astonishing. But it's a reflection of the quality of the title. Absolutely. That Rockstar Games delivered.
And this stuff takes a lot of work to put together, obviously. Large teams, a lot of time. I think the time between Grand Theft Auto games is like an average of 5 to 7 years or something like that, if not longer. And so I'm curious, how has the pandemic changed the way that your teams are working. And I know you mentioned to me in a separate conversation that some of your people are back to the office because they need to do motion capture. But I'm curious how you've kind of seen your business transform as a result of this internally.
Well, the whole point is we haven't seen it transform. The point is that we were able to move in the space of a week from in-office work to remote work across the entire workforce, something like 6,000 people. And part of it is that our IT team was so well planned for a disaster. We got the memo after Hurricane Sandy, and we simply had to figure out how to be ready for anything. So we had a day from home planned and supported, created by our IT folks right in March. I think it was scheduled for March 12th, and then the pandemic hit, and next thing you know, the day became permanent until now.
Right.
So we didn't see any loss of productivity, but equally, I wouldn't say that we had to find a different way to work. We already do our work both in the business side and the creative side largely on computers, except for things like motion capture. The only delays that we had were related to motion capture. Now we're back up and running because we actually have motion capture bubbles that have worked phenomenally well. They're a bit more expensive, but they do work. And we haven't missed a beat. Do I think that means the recipe for the future is work from home? I do not. There's just, we're reading articles about it all the time. And
Absolutely.
I also have to look at, motivation of companies that are talking about work from home being something they want to do on a permanent basis. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Are they trying to save real estate costs? I mean, that should be a small portion of your overall cost base. Do they really believe remote work will enhance collaboration? Hard to believe. So I don't believe the remote work is the way of the future. I do believe that we've had to open our eyes to the fact that there are certain changes that one could make that don't interfere with productivity, but maybe don't enhance productivity. Also, we want to be mindful of the fact that the CEOs who are talking about permanent remote work are at home in very different circumstances than many of the people who work for them. And it's all well and good, when you're in your palatial CEO land estate, so to say, wow, this is awesome, this is great. I mean, so great. Your chef can bring you lunch every day. But for, the real world, to be at home with your partner and your kids and, the laundry going and the dog barking, maybe you want to be at the office with your colleagues for 8 hours a day or more or fewer. So I don't see that we'll see a permanent shift. I think all of us are anxious to be able to be back together and collaborate. But we've made do and then some in these challenging times.
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting to watch that. I mean, just from my experience, right? And I hate to use the word content creator, but that's what we all are. And in my world, there's been a lot of talk about allowing remote work more because productivity is up, even if collaboration is different. And also, people are happier sometimes just having a 15-second commute. Granted, there's also burnout issues and all of that, but it seems like there's definitely a cultural shift happening toward at least a lot more flexibility and at least eliminating some of that awful time that we spend every morning and evening getting to and from work.
I think that's right. I think we'll find ourselves in the same position. I think we will be more flexible. I also think that, and remember, everything we're talking about, again, falls in the category of a high-class problem. Right. Remember, 65% of the workforce in America have been going to work every day out of their homes during the pandemic because they provide essential services or they provide services that can only be conducted at the workplace. So we're talking about a certain cadre of individuals. It happens that people we're talking about do work in the video game business for the reasons I said. We do our work on computers, but it is a high-class problem. I think you're right. It will create more flexibility. But I think you never want to underestimate the nature of collaboration in the hallways, and management by walking around. Where I do think you'll see meaningful changes, I already was really comfortable with video calls. I really like video calls, but I now don't even feel much of a difference between a video call and an in-person meeting if I know the people already. I think it is hard to create a relationship that way, harder, I should say. I
agree with you there.
And I do think that business travel, again, we're in 35% land, if you will. I do think business travel is probably permanently compromised because I can't tell you how many meetings I have that really do involve going to a conference room, entering the conference room, having a discussion, leaving the conference room and getting back, going back to the airport. And I'm not sure that I'm not as well served to do that on Zoom.
Yeah, I feel like the pressing the flesh meetings, as they're called, probably are going to go away. That's a good point.
I think a lot of them will go away. And I even think conferences, I think, you go to a conference really to meet people and network, but conferences that are sound also have great content. And, a lot of meetings on Zoom meetings can be great meetings. There's no ambient noise around you. There's no distractions. You're not running from meeting to meeting. You're not exhausted from having, flown in late or taken a red eye or something. You can learn what you need to learn and then go about your business. And for me, if I take a business trip, if I have a day of meetings on the West Coast, that's a 2.5 day trip when you really count it up, never mind sleep that's been interfered with. So I do think business travel, I think we're now all have a tighter lens on, why you should travel, when you should travel.
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good point. To that thought, one of the conversations that we're having in the tech industry broadly is around 5G wireless, right? There's a lot of marketing around it. Apple announced their next iPhone, and it's the tentpole feature. So I'm curious, there was a lot of assumption a year ago, 2 years ago, that 5G was going to really impact the way the video game industry worked, partially because stuff like game streaming or even remote play or whatever was more possible now thanks to the low latency and all these other things. We're all stuck at home, so that almost becomes moot. But I'm curious what you think of kind of how 5G is shaking out, at least at the beginning, right? We're still very much in the early, but I'm curious what you've seen.
It's early yet. I mean, I think it's just sort of better and faster. The ability to reach people wirelessly, more effectively, more efficiently, and that will enhance the quality of what you consume and enhance your ability to consume more of it. So, and that's the story of 5G. It's just better distribution potentially for certain types of distribution. It is not going to take away the need for fiber, at all. But of course, getting fiber to the last mile or the last 6 feet is really hard and really expensive. So I think the use for 5G ultimately is more likely to be in locations where there isn't fiber, as opposed to competing directly with fiber, which kind of defies reason.
Yeah, it's funny. There was no fiber in San Francisco for me when I was living there, but I moved to the Maryland suburbs. I suddenly have fiber. It doesn't make sense at all.
Exactly. I mean, it really doesn't make sense to be amazed where you can and can't find it.
Yeah.
But 5G, the idea with 5G is you shouldn't really notice a difference.
Right.
And I think that's really the point. You don't notice a difference. I haven't heard of any use cases yet that are something we haven't seen yet. I think it's just all we're concerned about is speed and bandwidth wherever we are. We want it to be seamless. We don't want to see load screens. We don't want latency. We don't want to wait for anything. We don't to think that, we're both old enough to remember dial-up and how long it took to connect, and how long it took to refresh, how long it took to send something. And now, if there's some glitch and an email or a text message takes 12 seconds to send, I want to tear my hair out. Like, it seems like an eternity.
Yeah.
So, I do think that that's where 5G matters. And ultimately, this is all about the explosion of data.
Right.
The truth is, and this is the area that ZMC is most focused on, is however much data you think consumer and enterprise will need in 5 years, need and want in 5 years, you're on, it'll be more. And 5G will enable us to deliver that.
Yeah, it's a good point. One of the other things that's a conversation around all this stuff is subscriptions. I know you and I have talked about subscriptions a lot. The video game industry, for those who don't know, Microsoft launched a big subscription service, but also a lot of your competitors, including Ubisoft, EA, a bunch of them have subscriptions as well. It seems like everyone's kind of going subscription happy right now. And so I'm curious kind of how you've looked at this market continuing to change. And especially now that I've got my Netflix, I've got my Disney, and then I've got my video games and everything else. How am I handling this, and what does the future look like?
Subscriptions are great for super users. But if you're not a super user, maybe they make somewhat less sense. Many Americans are super users of linear entertainment. The average American household consumes 150 hours a month of linear entertainment. That's probably more than 100 properties. What stands to reason that you would probably be willing to have a couple of subscriptions for which you pay $30, $40, $50, $60 a month so that you don't have to buy that all a la carte. That makes sense. But when you get into the video game business, where, as you said earlier, you may play an individual title for 60, 70, 80, 90 hours, and an average household consumes 45 hours a month. It maybe is less compelling to think of an all-you-can-eat or a lot of what you can eat service for $15 or $20 a month from a consumer point of view. And of course, you always have to start from the point of view of what's good for the consumer, what will resonate with the consumer.
Totally.
Having determined what's good for the consumer, what will the consumer pay? What does it cost to acquire the consumer, which reflects what they're willing to pay? What's the lifetime value when you take into account what they will pay and how long they stay involved when they churn out? When you take all that into account, then you have to ask the question, is this okay for the producer and the distributor? It's got to line up well for everyone involved. So I think right now, it seems to me that a lot of the subscription concepts are being promoted more from the point of view about what would be good for a company. Like, wow, I'd really love to have 100 million people pay me $10 a month. Wouldn't that be great? As opposed to what's really good for the consumer. And equally, we also have to be mindful of what's right for the creator. Because if we're creating a model where those who make the content are supposed to make less money for doing it, you have to ask yourself, well, how's that going to work out? And the answer is, it's not going to work out. They're going to go somewhere or do something that will be more economically viable if you're going to explain to them, we just decided to change the model on you and we're cutting your income in half.
Totally makes sense. And I think it's interesting because I've talked to the heads of Microsoft and Sony and about kind of thinking about when we get into a world where hardware doesn't matter anymore. And that's in the future. We don't know when, but that then their jobs as the Xbox and the PlayStation are to be gaming social networks, essentially, right? To be a catch-all, if you will. I'm joined to this just like I'm a Facebook user. And that's going to be a really interesting dynamic because it raises the question of what these subscriptions look like and how that all goes at that point too.
And I'm not sure they're wrong, because you do need aggregators in the entertainment business. I think those who believe companies that believe they can just have a direct-to-consumer offering and only offer their own products aren't really looking at the history of entertainment. Even now, when you watch linear entertainment, you don't go to Paramount Pictures website and download something from, even though you probably can. I wouldn't even know because I don't, nor do you. We go to Netflix or we go to Apple TV or we go to any number of other places that we can go where content is at least somewhat aggregated.
Right.
Disney's strategy makes sense because they aggregated so much content before they launched it. Netflix's strategy made sense because they started as a video store, right? Where they had everything available. The world is not moving towards everyone having their own balkanized walled garden. And so I'm not sure that some big players in the business are wrong when they say we should create a distribution network. There'll be a need for a distribution network in addition to people having direct consumer offerings. Yeah. Take-Two's strategy is to do all of the above. Be where the consumer is. We already have a direct consumer offering. I'm certain we will have more of them. I'm skeptical that we'll say to consumers, whether you like it or not, this is the only place that you can get this. I'm skeptical that we'll do that. Among other things, I think you'll create a marketing detriment, because we do like to market to people who are already using products. And so if they're only in Take-Two land, then, I think that could be a problem when we have a massive blockbuster coming and perhaps we have fewer active users at that point because we haven't had a blockbuster in the market for a few months. That hasn't happened in a long time, but it certainly could occur.
Yeah, totally. No, exclusivity has always been a tricky subject in this industry. Yeah. One last thing I wanted to bring up, and obviously we're a couple of weeks out, but there are new video game consoles coming out, right? The PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X.
It's
in addition,
upon us.
Huh?
It's upon us.
Yes, it's upon us. and we've got, also the Nintendo Switch from a couple of years ago. I'm curious what you think about what this next generation brings. We talked a little bit about the photorealism and all of that, but what else does this mean? Usually when a new device comes out, it changes the dynamic of how we play video games, right? We had with the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, it was about playing online a lot more. And with the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, it was more about remote play and all these other social networking stuff and streaming. I'm curious what the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X are going to do.
Such a great question. I mean, again, it's going to be better looking and faster, better memory, less latency. It'll be a better experience. But you're asking a different question, which is, will it usher in a new period of change in the model and the way products consumed? And I'm not sure it's related to that technology, but I do think cross-platform is one of the things that you're going to see. And that goes to your point about hardware not mattering. And
right.
Eventually, hardware doesn't matter in all entertainment businesses. I mean, hardware really, really, really mattered in the early days of motion picture distribution, because there was the Motion Picture Patent Corporation owned everything. You had to go to them to get a hold of stuff. If we find ourselves in a cinema, we don't say, what projector's back there? Is that a Bell and Howell back there? So, but there was a point in time when effectively you were asking that question. The walled gardens of the past, those walls have already come down significantly as Steam grows, as the Epic Store grows, as Apple continues to be a presence, as Facebook is a presence in video games, casual or perhaps less casual. The world becomes less attuned to these proprietary strongholds.
Yeah.
And so eventually, and there's already cross-platform play, of course, but there'll be much more of that. So I think that's one of those things. But that takes you to the land you just described, which is then the hardware companies will have to redefine themselves. And they're redefining themselves as network companies,
right?
Which is just fine as long as the nature of what they're doing is consistent with what our creators want and consistent with appropriate incentives for the people who make this magic happen, which is the people actually making the video games, the folks at Rockstar and 2K, Private Division, Social Point, Playdots, all of our labels, and then of course all of our competitors, creators who are phenomenally talented. Wish we did, but we don't have a monopoly on that talent.
Totally. Well, Strauss, I really appreciate taking the time to chat. Once again, Strauss Zelnick, the CEO of Take-Two. I'm Ian Scher from CNET, and thanks for listening.